Joe Biden has largely stayed off the campaign trail since the outbreak of the coronavirus. But instead of the former vice president's low profile hurting him, he is seeing a growing lead over President Trump in the polls. Joining us now, Symone Sanders, senior advisor for the Biden campaign. Symone, what do you make of the relatively small crowd at the president's rally last night and the fact that so many of the thousands who were there were not wearing masks?
Well, thank you for having me this morning, Chris, and happy Father's Day. Look, Donald Trump's debacle of a rally last night will long be remembered. Lest we not forget, the president's campaign required that folks who were attending his rally sign a waiver so that if they were to get sick with the coronavirus, that the campaign would not be held liable. But I think the most damning thing from that rally last night, Chris, was in fact the president's admission that he, quote unquote, said to his people to slow down the testing. This is an appalling attempt to lessen the numbers, only to make him look good. And so I think that's what will be remembered long after last night's debacle of a rally, the admission of the president that he slowed testing for his political benefit, and it's not for the American people.
Well, let me just point out, they say that it was a joke, and it didn't seem particularly, well, let me just point out that's what they said. I want to pick up, though, on this whole question of the public health of these mass gatherings, Symone, because when there were tens of thousands of people marching in the streets, and quite rightly, in protest for the death of George Floyd and the issues of police brutality, there were so many of them, not maybe most, but many of them were not wearing masks. At that time, the vice president, Joe Biden, called those rallies right and necessary with no mention of public health. I guess the question is, why the double standard where the protests were okay, but this rally was dangerous?
Chris, there is no double standard here. Protesting is an American right. The American people have the right to go out and raise their voices. The difference here is, Chris, we are talking about the President of the United States, whose vice president, by the way, heads the White House Coronavirus Task Force, holding a rally, not following the own precautions that his own public health officials have put out. Look, the president has to lead, Chris, and President Trump has demonstrated in so many times, and every sense of the word, that he is unable to do so. And so the difference between folks going out and protesting police brutality and the president planning a rally where 6 of his own advanced staffers before the rally contracted COVID-19 is as clear as day. And again, Chris, this is about public health. No one is saying, we want the economy to reopen. We want folks to get back to work. More than 20 million Americans are still out of work. Almost 120,000 people have died due to COVID-19. Those jobless, those deaths did not have to happen. We have to take precautions, Chris. We have to do what is necessary in order to protect the American people. And months ago,
but why didn't, I guess what I'm asking, though, if I may, Symone, I just am asking this one question. Why didn't the vice president, because whether it was indoors or outdoors, whatever the reason for the gathering, there were thousands of people in the streets in these protests. Why didn't Vice President Biden say, look, I understand the concern, but these may be potential super spreaders?
Chris, I just listened to your last segment where the doctor noted that there is no evidence that the protests are what have spiked coronavirus cases across the country. So I'm not sure what you're asking or what you're suggesting. Look, Vice President Biden has really exhibited leadership on this issue. We have been out campaigning. I also heard you say that we haven't really been on the campaign trail. We've been on the campaign trail since March. We have been campaigning virtually. But you have seen Vice President Biden go back out into the actual campaign trail. And our events are safe. They are socially distant. They adhere with the CDC guidelines. Vice President Biden wears a mask. People participating wear a mask, because this is about being safe, Chris. This is about ensuring the safety of everyone involved. And what President Trump has demonstrated yesterday is that he actually is not concerned with the public health. He is concerned with his ability to hold a rally. And I'd just like to note, the folks who are out there protesting, Chris, they should be able to go get a coronavirus test.
Symone, you got to let me in here.
The folks out there,
Symone,
you may this point, Chris. The folks out there protesting, they should be able to get a coronavirus test.
Symone, I don't want to get into a fight with you, but you got to let me ask a question.
Able to do so.
Symone, all right. So here's the question I'm going to ask you. Joe Biden has. You talk about him being on the campaign trail, but I think most people have been struck that he stayed in his Delaware home mostly, and in large part since March. He's held a few socially distanced events, but by the large part, he has not been on the campaign trail, and he could have held certainly more socially distanced events, and perhaps more important, he has not held a news conference, either in person or online, for 80 days, almost 3 months. Why not?
Well, Chris, to be clear, Vice President Biden does interviews, takes questions from the press regularly. And yes, in March, we have adjusted to this new normal like most people in America. We have been campaigning virtually, but just because we are campaigning virtually does not mean we are not meeting actual voters across the country. Vice President Biden has campaigned in Michigan and Florida. Dr. Biden has campaigned in Colorado and Texas. So the reality is what we have been doing is following CDC guidelines, Chris. What we have been doing is
But why hasn't he held a news conference for 80? But why hasn't he held a news conference for 80 days?
Chris, as many of y'all in the national press and in the Beltway press are well aware, we take pride in prioritizing local media. And so the vice president is doing local media interviews. He's doing national media interviews, and he is taking questions from reporters. President
Trump says that one of the reasons that Biden is holed up in his basement is because he's not up to campaigning. Here was the president on that this week.
He's not running his campaign. People are running his campaign. I see quotes all the time that he said this, he said that about me. And they're long, beautiful, flowing sentences. I said, Joe didn't make that statement. And Joe doesn't even know the statement was made.
Does the former vice president contribute to the president being able to make that argument by being out of public view so often?
This is just despicable, Chris. Honestly, it truly is. The fact that folks are parroting this, just unfounded, salacious lie from the president and his campaign, that Vice President Biden isn't up to the challenge. He's absolutely up to it. He's absolutely up to it. Vice President Biden would tell you, if he were sitting right here, that he can't wait to see Donald Trump on the debate stage and he can't wait to campaign with him. I just find it interesting that folks continue to parrot these lines from the Trump campaign when it is Donald Trump who stood at the White House press podium and suggested Americans should ingest bleach to clear themselves out of the coronavirus.
We reported on that too, as you know, Symone. I want to put up some new Fox polls, which I think you're going to like. The latest Fox poll shows that Biden is leading President Trump 50% to 38%. But when asked why they back their candidate, 31% of Biden supporters say it's because of enthusiasm for him, and 63% because they fear Mr. Trump. For the president, it's almost exactly the reverse. Symone, a lead is a lead, but is the lack of enthusiasm for Biden, even among Biden supporters, what you might call an enthusiasm gap, is that a potential problem?
No, Chris, it's not. Look, we heard this a lot throughout the primary about an enthusiasm gap, who could and who could not turn out voters. And what we saw in the primaries is that Vice President Biden, in contest after contest, handedly won, but also turned out voters. Turnout was up in Virginia in the Democratic primary. It was up in North Carolina. In the Georgia primaries that just happened, more than 1.1 million voters voted early. And so we are very confident in our strategy, Chris. We think our voters are excited, but also I think these numbers spell trouble for President Trump, that this is a referendum. This election will be a referendum on his presidency, on his lack of leadership, and how his actions have directly affected the American people.
Symone, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Please come back.
Thank you.